The evidence is everywhere. The climate crisis is no longer in the future. But from our political headlines, you'd think that's not the case, as the coalition takes the debate back in time on the merits of net zero. And for Labor, questions remain about its willingness to act on its own policies. Today, I'm talking to editor Lenore Taylor, head of Newsroom Mike Ticher, and climate and environment editor Adam Morton on whether Australia is meeting the moment on our climate emergency. Good morning, Lenore.
Morning, Reged.
Good morning, Mike.
Morning, Reged.
And good morning, Adam.
Hello.
Look, it used to be a bit theoretical, the climate crisis, but it really is well and truly with us. We just can't avoid it anymore.
I mean, that's true. Sort of the things that were going to happen, were predicted to happen when I first started writing about this 35 years ago, are now all happening. You know, we see stories about the massive algal bloom in South Australia, for instance. Now, there's a number of contributing factors to that, but one is a marine heat wave, which is linked to global heating. There are marine heat waves in 80% of the reefs around the world, including Ningaloo. Tuvalu citizens are applying for visas en masse to come to Australia because sea levels are rising. There are massive extreme weather events all around the world. In Australia, it means many houses are uninsurable. These are all the things back when we started writing about this and discussing this that were predicted to happen, and they are all happening. The crisis is real and it's happening now, and yet it feels like political momentum is waning. You know, the United States, obviously, President Trump is going backwards. I think his latest idea is that if NASA stops measuring it, it might go away. The gap between what needs to happen and to keep global heating somewhere in check is growing bigger. And yet, on the other hand, all of the technologies and the mechanisms, the wherewithal to solve the crisis are more and more available and ever cheaper. So we're in this sort of strange conundrum where it's happening and we've got the tools to fix it, and it's like, do we have the will to fix it? I find it quite confounding.
Yeah, it feels like Australia's in an odd position globally because the tide seems to be going against taking stronger action on climate in lots of countries, lots of important countries, although not all. Whereas here we are in a place where a government's been elected with a huge majority on a platform of doing more about climate, not less. And there is a huge opportunity here for them to, make good on that. But obviously, climate is something that does require global cooperation, and we're a medium-sized player in that. We can't do everything by ourselves. What we do doesn't affect what happens in lots of other countries. But yeah, we're kind of an outlier, and that makes it difficult as well when we're relying on global cooperation.
This is exactly what we knew was happening, that we know is coming, but sometimes it feels like it comes in a rush. And we've seen that before with the Black Summer bushfires a few years ago. And I really do think that the algal bloom in South Australia is an example of that, and the marine heat wave more broadly. As Lenore said, the algal bloom there's multiple causes, but it can't be divorced from how hot the oceans are at the moment. Sometimes it's easy to compartmentalise this stuff with so much happening across the planet and so much happening in our lives, but this is happening in real time. And we're not even talking, as Lenore mentioned, about, for example, the shocking bleaching that's happening at Ningaloo Reef, which we can't see in the same way, and on the Great Barrier Reef. It's happening now, day by day. It's really quite extraordinary.
And it's kind of a reminder that there are extra things that we probably hadn't thought about, like algal blooms. I don't think were on the general checklist of terrible things that might happen, but
the unintended,
yeah.
Yes, and the unexpected consequences. Look, it's overwhelming, as you all say. The future really is here. So why are the Nationals and the Liberals, the coalition, fighting over the validity of emission reduction policies and of net zero? Why are they sort of behind the moment?
I think it comes down to sheer political expediency, to be frank. There's a faction of the Liberal Party and the National Party who have used this issue as a sort of political stick, as a political vehicle before, and it looks very much, it appears very much like they're gearing up to do it again. Now it's not axe the tax that's the bogeyman, which, back then made no sense either. It wasn't a tax and, it was an efficient vehicle to drive down emissions. But anyway, that all got just steamrolled over. Now it's get rid of net zero, which when you think about it, makes zero sense. Like that's a target. If you want to get rid of net zero, you need to really say, are you saying do nothing? Are you saying do a little bit? Like it's not, that isn't actually even a policy. And they want to wind things back even further. I mean, Barnaby Joyce has a private members bill which wants to repeal even Howard era emissions policies. And, I think it is really the stalking horse for the divisions within the coalition about whether they should be more populist, more nativist, more, I guess, if you want to say Trumpian, and those who are saying we lost the election, we, as in the coalition, lost the election because we were not sufficiently of the mainstream, and this would be one example of an issue where they weren't sufficiently of the mainstream. And once again, you're seeing News Corp back in the sort of climate skeptic faction. They've got a big campaign in the Daily Telegraph against wind turbines. Now, there are legitimate concerns in some rural constituencies about the impact on land and property values of wind turbines, but the Daily Telegraph are calling them turbines of terror. And they actually editorialised to say the net zero doubters should be given a voice. And I just think, this is sort of a back to the future discussion, but I think we need to put it in perspective. The Nationals really are not that relevant to actual policy making at the moment. They are one little bit of a coalition which is on that one little side of the parliament, and Labor has all the other seats. The Greens are in the balance of power position in the Senate. So we've got to see this as a political tool being used in the internecine fighting within the coalition rather than any kind of serious part of the discussion.
Reasonable to point out, I think, that the net zero doubters did have a voice quite recently in our federal election. Those issues were brought up. They were prosecuted pretty hard in a lot of electorates, particularly up and down the New South Wales coast. In almost every case, they did not gain enough traction to get the opponents of those projects elected. So, yeah.
Although the Daily Telegraph's editorial is arguing that the reason the coalition lost was that they weren't climate sceptical enough.
Yeah, I mean, good luck with that one.
Can someone please show me some numbers to back that up? Because I just don't see where it comes from.
Numbers, Adam.
It's obviously a political story, what happens within the federal coalition, and there is, a move in some places internationally that is similar. So there is something that this is tapping into. But at one level, I find the level of focus on this kind of ridiculous. The coalition went to the last election with no policies to cut emissions in the next decade at least. What I see with the level of focus that we have on this nationally is the opportunity cost, where we're not talking about the stuff that could actually be being done and the stuff that we're not addressing. I mean, Treasury put out an analysis last month that said $2.2 billion that extreme weather events and natural disasters had cost the economy $2.2 billion in the first half of the year. That's just going to continue to grow. Places, as Lenore said earlier, parts of the country are uninsurable. Where's the focus on these things? And where's the focus on the argument about the economic benefits for Australia if we take this transition that will happen at whatever pace? It's going to happen. It's not just suddenly going to stop.
Yeah. And just to add to that, the focus also can possibly give more credence to these arguments or give them more salience, or have people who maybe are not entirely tuned into the debate give them pause for thought beyond what the facts might render reasonable.
We had an election, as you say, Labor's got a big majority. How committed are they? How ambitious is the government being in doing what needs to be done to cut emissions?
Well, this is the big question, and this is the question we do need to really be talking about. I mean, the government did get the energy transition underway in its first term, and compared to the mind-numbing, ridiculous inaction we'd had for a decade or more before that, that was a damn fine thing. They did the underwriting program for renewable energy, big vehicle emission standards, tax credits for green industries. There's this home battery policy that's just coming into effect, subsidies for home batteries, which is provingly wildly popular. So they did do quite a lot of things. They have got an agenda to do more things in this term. And they've got this massive opportunity. They have got this whopping great majority. They've got a path through the Senate. They've got, by most political analysts' reckonings, 2 terms to get, we can get this thing done. It can happen. The question is how quickly the government will want to move, how spooked they might be if the whole sort of backlash from the coalition starts again. And I guess there's sort of sometimes the contradictions in what they're doing, in that they are, on the one hand, really pushing for the energy transition to happen, and on the other hand, approving coal mines and gas fields, including Northwest Shelf, that's going to be exporting till 2070. Now, I'm not in the camp that thinks that these things should be shut down tomorrow, but 2070 does not seem to be a tenable timeframe for continuing to be a major fossil fuel exporter. So there's contradictions as well. But I think the focus on the government and what it's going to do in this term and potentially another term is exactly what we should be talking about.
Yeah, and I think we need to talk about what the opportunity and the opportunity cost is if we don't act. I mean, there are really big decisions coming in the second half of the year, both on emissions reduction to 2035 with that target, and that will, unless it's an incredibly weak target, will demand new policies to cut emissions. And sorry to get a bit wonkish, but if we take out what's happening with the land and forests, our emissions have barely come down since 2005. That change, which is only a rough estimate and not due to climate policy overwhelmingly, masks the fact that we have done very little to turn our economy around to get it off fossil fuels overall. Huge tasks in front of us. Huge, as people keep saying, Matt Keane from the Climate Change Authority says, huge potential benefits if we actually get stuck into this. And but I mean, one of the frustrations of the focus on the coalition and net zero is, where is the discussion more broadly within the parliament and within the media about what are we going to do to seriously address this problem and set up Australia's economic future through that? And I really think that the next 6, 12, 24, 36 months, that's what we should be talking about.
And presumably, Adam, and you'd know this better than I would, the government is going to have to actually start to answer that question, at least at the point when it announces a 2035 target, because it would be not that credible to announce a target without some way of getting there. Is that what you think they'll do?
Yes. There has been work very quietly going on what they call sectoral plans. Yeah. So basically plans for 6 different parts of the economy, how we can cut emissions, what the potential is, where gains can be made. We are expecting to see those in the second half of the year, and some sort of plan about how we'll get to net zero. So none of that will be meaningful if there's not new policies attached. We know that the government didn't, other than the significant battery policy, which is, as far as it goes, we're having significant impact already. We're seeing a lot of people take up household batteries, and that has a broader impact on the electricity system beyond just the people who get the batteries. It helps get us to where we need to go. But beyond that, we didn't really hear anything about it in the campaign. So there's, a lot of unanswered questions that I think we'll be asking in the second half of the year, and hopefully the government will have stuff to say about.
I think there's another task ahead of them as well, which is to sell all this. When they do come up with these actual policies, they need to sell a vision of the future of how things can be.
Can the divisions in the coalition help them sell it?
Well, I think they need to be not spooked by what's going on in the coalition. They should be encouraged by what happened in the election. Okay, it's not a ringing endorsement of any particular environmental emissions policy that Labor took to the election, but it's also not a rejection of them. I think that in lots of areas they're pushing at an open door in this, and they should be more positive about saying, look, we've got this great opportunity. There's humps to overcome, but give it a few years and you'll see your power prices coming down. You'll see, a whole new way of organising our energy in Australia that is going to benefit lots and lots of people in quite noticeable ways and reasonably quickly.
I agree with you, and I think that in that sort of meta way involves overturning this constant narrative that taking action is a cost, a burden, a potential economic disaster, puts it at an economic disadvantage. In fact, all the opposite to those things are true, and someone needs to be selling that story as effectively as some in the Nationals are selling the false story.
And too often I think it's treated as purely a political problem, which is easier for them when the coalition is a mess on it, rather than something that is a long-term economic and social issue that it has to be at the front of thinking and public discussion.
And people can see the benefits in their individual lives. That's why we've got the massive uptake of solar panels and everyone's rushing to get a subsidised battery. Like, people can see it.
But the message matters as well. Certainly if governments fail to do what matters, are we seeing now the courts taking over with some recent decisions there on climate action that people are bringing?
I think increasingly that is the case. I mean, it's not a straight line. We had a really significant advisory opinion that's been put out by the International Court of Justice in The Hague on what is being considered a landmark case. The court was asked by Vanuatu, backed by 130 other countries, what obligations countries have to prevent climate change and what are the consequences if they fail. And the 15 judges were unanimous in what they found and probably went as far as those bringing the case could possibly have hoped. They found that countries that fail to take measures to prevent climate change and that aren't working to limit global heating to 1.5 degrees, which is enshrined in the Paris Agreement, could be in violation of international law, even if they're not signed up to the UN climate agreements, because it crosses over into international human rights law, customary international law, the law of the sea. It's not a binding finding, but it is a significant step that could lead to countries suing each other and could have ramifications for Australia. I thought some initial comments by Vanuatu's climate minister, Ralph Regenvanu, this morning were pretty interesting. He said that if you follow this, Australia is committing wrongful acts and needs to start making climate reparations. And the next step for Vanuatu is to take it to the UN General Assembly and ask it for it to be adopted there. And if there are any cases, we're talking years and years down the track. But there is a moral weight to this, you would think. And it would be a factor, I think, that should be being considered when Australia is considering its 2035 emissions reduction target. It does suggest it should be at the upper end if it's living up to its international legal responsibilities. And I do think this will have reverberations that will continue and give a real moral weight to the Pacific countries who are so important. Those relationships are so important to Australia, and we're trying to land the hosting of a climate conference in Australia next year in partnership with Pacific leaders. Well, expect this to come up again and again if that comes off and is being pursued. I think it's a significant one. But closer to home, there's a range of climate judgments that are coming down. It feels like every week there's a new one. And there are steps forward and there are steps back for those wanting to see greater action. So I think we're going to see this more and more. It's just not going, like the natural disasters, it's just not going away.
All right, time for what we can't get out of our heads. Adam, let's start with you.
I mean, the honest answer is Gaza, but I'm going to go closer to home. I live in Tasmania and we've just had an election here. And a friend of mine in Canberra said to me the other day, I hope you're not offended, but I don't understand what's happening in Tasmania, but it all seems quaint, weird and a little bit funny. And
can you just get back to us when you guys figure out who you want to govern?
Yeah, well, that could take some time. So a few weeks, I think. All I want to say about it is because I know how to have a good time, went along to the tally room at the Grand Chancellor on Saturday night. And this is a tradition that only Tasmania maintains. And it's great to see democracy in action. The leaders of the three major parties come and speak. Anyone can come in and watch. The media is doing their live broadcasts from there. It's nerdy, but really healthy, I think. The election result itself is just Tassie, because of its Hare-Clark system, is at the pointy end of the rise of the non-major party vote. And we've seen a situation again where no one is going to have a majority of seats. And in the broad, I think we'll probably have a Liberal government, at least when Parliament returns. They got the most seats and we'll see what happens. But the thing that I think to really take away from it is, and Tassie's going to have to do it first, is to work out how parliaments are going to work when the major parties do not have the historic dominance they once had.
Which many countries have done around the world.
Yeah, right.
European countries are famous for it.
New Zealand, and in the Pacific. But like we had 9 crossbenchers, 5 Greens and 4 Independents who are more established than before. There'll be more than 9 out of a parliament of 35. So the Liberal and Labor Party are going to have to learn how to deal with them.
I love the Tassie election too. I love it when voters make a point. Mike, what's yours?
So obviously, yes, what you can't get out of your head, I think, for everyone at the moment really is Gaza. But to go to a different story, we ran an amazing story this week about the dam in Ukraine that people will remember was blown up a couple of years ago, apparently by pro-Russian forces, a huge dam, unleashing an absolute, an enormous, terrible flood on the people downstream during the Russia-Ukraine war. So obviously no one wants that kind of thing to happen. That was terrible. But in the wake of that, nature has kind of recolonized the area that was previously underwater. And there are some amazing pictures of what it looks like now. Like a kind of forest has grown up on large parts of this place as it used to be before they built the dam. And lots of flora and fauna have returned. It's not entirely a positive story by any means, because there's lots of concerns about the toxic residues that would have been there from the dam's existence. And also, like I say, it's a kind of inadvertent regeneration. No one would have planned it that way, but it's just a fascinating example of what does happen when ways that we've interfered with nature are suddenly reversed, and nature starts to return in lots of, just a really interesting way, and some amazing pictures in that story as well. I absolutely love that story.
Oh, we'll have to check them out. Lenore, what's yours?
I have been quite fascinated by the decision by CBS to cancel The Late Show, which CBS says was purely a financial decision because late night television doesn't pay anymore and it was losing money. Other people have alleged that it was because the host Colbert had criticised a payment that CBS made to Donald Trump over a lawsuit Donald Trump was taking to against another CBS show, which most people thought had not a lot of chance of success. In any event, what I find fascinating and kind of entertaining is Colbert's reaction, the reaction of all the other late night hosts in support of him. We've run a story about this. Reged and our Washington correspondent David Smith did a wonderful episode of Full Story about it. I mean, the thing that I keep thinking is, what did CBS think was going to happen if you axe the show and you leave the late night host on air until next May?
10 months. They should rename the show Colbert Unleashed.
Where did they think this was going to go? Anyway, I just would recommend reading and viewing the various clips that we've got up of the reactions that I mentioned.
And keeping across it for the next 10 months as Colbert ratchets up whatever he wants to say. Look, Lenore, Mike, Adam, it's been wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Reged.
Thanks, Reged.
Thanks.